Okay, I think we have a pretty good crowd, so we're going to get started. I just wanted to let everyone know that we are recording tonight's meeting, so you can go back and watch it later if you need to. Thank you for joining us for tonight's presentation on the changes that DCHA is making to the rent reasonableness process. We are hosting 3 stakeholder meetings. Tonight is our second, and we're happy to have all of you here to hear about the changes. Anissa, do you want to go to the next slide? So my name is Jenna Savasco. I'm the Chief of Staff at the DC Housing Authority. I am joined by Dorian Jenkins, who is a management consultant who has been supporting our Housing Choice Voucher program for several months. I'm also joined by Anissa Jones and Akisha Pompey, who are the deputy directors in our Housing Choice Voucher program. Yesterday evening and tomorrow, we will also have the affordablehousing.com team with us. They were unable to join tonight's meeting. We expect that you will have lots of questions during our presentation tonight. We're going to ask you to use the chat function to submit those questions while we're talking. We will answer all of those questions at the end of our presentation to the best of our ability. And we will also continue to update the FAQ on our website so that you can see responses to your questions in writing and to other people's questions as well. I'm going to turn it over to Dorian Jenkins now to get us started.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. And also, I want to apologize for our vendor, affordablehousing.com. Their team was available yesterday, and they will be available tomorrow, but unfortunately, they couldn't attend tonight's meeting. We'll do our best to answer those specific technical questions that you have. However, if there's something that we cannot answer, we will definitely put the answer in the FAQs on the website. So why are we here? We're here to update you, all of our stakeholders and our partners in running the HCV program here in DC about the new rent reasonableness process and how it may impact all the stakeholders. And next, Anissa. And let me just confirm, and if someone can just put in the chat, you guys can see the slides, right? The PowerPoint presentation. If anyone could just let us know that you can just verify that you can see the slides. Yes, okay. All right, so that's why we're here. And a little background on how we got here. The HCVP or Housing Choice Voucher Program have some annual requirements. And some of those requirements include completing a market study annually after HUD issues its fair market rents. That market study is used by housing authorities across the country, including DC, to set the payment standards. The payment standard is used to set the amount of subsidy we can pay on behalf of each of our tenants. It is not used to set the contract rent. So annually, HUD puts out fair market rents. Housing authorities across the country review those fair market rents to set their payment standards to ensure that their family subsidy allows them to rent in the local market. Housing authorities are also required to do a utility allowance study annually and update their utility allowance schedules. The Housing DC, we have done all of those this year and made those effective July 1st, 2023. Previously to this, the Housing Authority was not in total compliance with HUD regulations in the way we did rent reasonableness. Rent reasonableness has always had to be done on a unit by unit basis, where we're comparing units on the open market or comparing to unassisted units on the open market when we're determining contract rent. So now we are, in order to come into compliance with HUD regulations, going to begin doing unit by unit rent reasonableness effective July 1st using the software system that we've acquired, affordablehousing.com. This company is a nationally rated company with housing authorities across the country utilizing their system. I think they have nearly 1,000 agencies across the country, small, medium, and large, who use their rent reasonableness software. Even though the payment standard does not impact the contract rent, we still wanted to advise you that we have set the 2023 payment standard at 187% of the local fair market rents as posted by HUD. Next slide.
I'm sorry, the slideshow is giving me a little bit of trouble. There we go.
That's right. I think I jumped ahead anyway. As I said earlier, reasonableness is not an option. It is a requirement of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's also a requirement that housing authorities do the way they do reasonableness is also specified by HUD. We must ensure that the rents that we approve are in alignment with the open market for unsubsidized units. So in other words, we must compare our units that we're going to lease to unassisted units in the marketplace and ensure the rent that we approve is in alignment with those rents. We are forbidden from setting the market. So we must be in alignment with the market. The Housing Choice Voucher Program is not supposed to, or actually is forbidden from setting the market rents in the area. They're not here, so I think I'm taking this one, right? AffordableHousing.com's tool. Okay, so I'm gonna do my best to be their CEO. We selected AffordableHousing.com after doing a procurement, and we looked in the marketplace for the best possible tool that will assist us in performing reasonableness and be in compliance with HUD regulations. Ultimately, we selected AffordableHousing.com because for DCHA, they were the best fit for this agency. As I stated earlier, they have nearly 1,000 public housing authorities across the country utilizing their systems. Their comparable database here in DC has over 150,000 units in it currently, and it is updated daily. So they're constantly mining comps in the area and updating their tool. There is a free version of the tool on their website at affordablehousing.com. That version is not the version that the housing authority will use to do rent reasonableness. However, it is a tool that you, the owners, can use to figure out or guess or determine what your unit is worth on the open market. So when you submit a unit to us, you have an idea of what your unit can command, and then we'll put it through the affordablehousing.com system and do a rent reasonableness determination. Next slide. So some of the websites that their tool utilize are Home Finder, Trulia, Apartment Guide, Rent.com, Zillow, and there's several others that they mine on a daily basis to load comparable units into their software. So they pull the data from there and import it into their software that does the comparable analysis. And again, I can't get into the details and the science behind the algorithms and the regressional analysis that they do, that the software does, but they crunch all those numbers. And when we submit a unit, and they look for like and similar units in the area, and then the system advises us what is a reasonable rent for that unit. So we use leading websites. It goes into the software. Another key feature that we loved about their tool, it allows owners to submit comparables. So you can submit your rent rolls, you can submit your comparables, you can submit them directly in affordablehousing.com, or during the appeals process that we'll talk about later, you can submit them to the housing authority and we'll give them to affordablehousing.com and they can input them in the software. I do want to state, though, those comps are validated before they're used. So any comps that's submitted to us by owners, property managers, or agents, they are put in the system and they go through a validation process to determine if they are actually viable comps that the system can use in doing a rent reasonableness determination. And I know they wanted me to say this process is basically like an appraisal. So if you've ever, and I'm sure most of you have had an appraiser done and you see the subject property and the other properties that's used to compare to the subject property, that's similar to the way this tool works. Next. All right, housing choice voucher rents. I believe this is me too, right?
This is me. I can help you now.
Okay, good. There you go.
You can tag me.
Akeisha. Jump in, Akeisha. I'm tagging you in.
Tag. Good afternoon, everyone. So let's get to the meat of things. How does this affect you? Definitely on the leasing process. So the software takes into account the factors that are outlined in the 24 CFR 982.507B. What does that mean? It's talking about the features and amenities of the unit. It's talking about who pays what utilities, what type of unit it is, how much rent is, bedroom size, and all of those features. So on your leasing packet going forward as of July 1st, the only change that's happened to the leasing packet is that we're going to add the features in amenity form, which is this part right here. We just want to ask you a little bit more about your unit, about if it have ceiling fans, is there washer and dryer hookup, dishwasher, swimming pool, um, garages, those things. So when the leasing packet comes in, we're going to review the packet for affordability, which we have always done. And we're going to review it for the features and amenities to run the rent reasonableness in conjunction with the request for tenancy approval. From there, I want to make sure that I do state our leasing process and timeline has not changed. We don't expect it to be longer. We actually expect it to be faster and more efficient. So we're that's where we'll be moving to. You can give me the next slide, Vanessa. And just one more thing I need to add, that when you turn in your leasing packet and we do the rent reasonableness and affordability, when the inspection team goes out to do the inspection, they're going to reconfirm everything that you have already told us. If everything is the same, everything will stay the same. If it's not, we will rerun the rent reasonableness test. Also, what's new is our utility allowances. Right now, everybody's familiar with the utility calculator. We no longer have the utility calculator. I like to say that we're going back to old school, where we're actually doing the actual utilities that you have. So if it's heating, we want to know if it's natural gas, electric, heat pump, oil, all of those things. So we have, of the 9 utility types, we've broken them down into 3 utility schedules. And those utility schedules would be single family, which would cover townhome and mobile home. Duplex would cover duplex, triplex, fourplex, row house, and low rise. High rise would cover any apartment that got 5 or more units. So DCHA is contracted with a national certified industry expert to complete the utility allowance schedule, and this will also be effective July 1st. The utility allowance schedule is part of the tenant rent and the subsidy calculation completed when executing a new contract. DCHA applies the allowances based upon who is obligated to pay specific utilities. One thing I do want to say that's good in this area, and I've been doing housing with DCHA for about 7 years now, and I always hear on the submarkets, why am I not getting the credit for the utilities that I pay as a landlord? So the great thing now that will be taken into consideration, so it don't have to be all utilities or no utilities. If the landlord pays a portion of utilities, that will also be considered in the rent reasonableness analysis.
Hey, Keisha, just want to remind you, these are public and they will be posted on the website, correct?
Yes, they are already posted on the website.
Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. So the process map for this process, in order to submit, once you submit a request for tenancy approval through the landlord portal, DCHA will complete a rent reasonableness and affordability review. If that review is approved, DCHA schedules an inspection and the inspectors verify the features documented in your RFTA submission. So it's important that you note everything in your units and you fill that form out correctly. If the features match the RFTA document, once the inspectors verify, then DCHA confirms the move-in date and the landlord and tenant sign their lease and submit it to DCHA. If there's a situation where DCHA does the rent reasonableness and affordability and it's denied, DCHA will contact you, the landlord, or the management company through the landlord portal and attempt to negotiate the rent down. If the inspection fails, or if the features do not match let me start with the failure. If the unit fails inspection, the unit is scheduled for re-inspection within 14 days. If the features do not match, then the rent reasonableness may have to be adjusted, and then DCHA may call you to negotiate downward again, and then they would complete the new rent reasonableness and affordability, and then you would go on to the top slide, which DCHA confirms the move-in date, and landlord and tenant sign and submit the lease to DCHA. And if you do not have a current portal account, you can go on our website, log onto our portal, and the instructions to create a portal account are there for you.
Anissa, can you go back for a second? When will that be active?
July 1st.
So just to confirm, for owners who want to submit a rent increase, which Anissa is going to go through next, that feature on the owner portal will be effective July 1st. So if you go there now, you won't see it, but it will be live July 1st.
I'm sorry, and if I could just add one thing, Dorian, because we have we had it live because we was testing it for about 24 to 48 hours. So we had got like 100 requests. Just note that you will have to resubmit these requests on July 1st.
All right. So the rent increase process. DCHA must complete a rent reasonableness assessment for each rent increase. A landlord may request a rent increase for units that they have to have both circumstances. You have to have had an up-to-date past inspection and have had your tenant occupy that unit for at least 12 months. So if you're in the first 5 months of tenancy with someone, you're not eligible. If that unit has not passed inspection within the last 24 months, you are not eligible for a rent increase. However, if you're currently in the inspection process, then we will complete that inspection process, and then you can request a rent increase. Or if you have not had a biennial inspection in the last 24 months, then please reach out to us, and we will schedule that inspection as quickly as possible. And that second scenario is not a very common one. If at the time of the request, the agency determines that the rent is not reasonable, DCHA is required to adjust the rent downward. So if you already have a portal account, on July 1st, as Dorian stated, you will be able to go to the finance tab and click on request a rent increase, and then it will ask you to fill out a couple more factors, and then that request will be processed in the time stated in this presentation.
Can you just go back 1 second?
Sure.
1 second, Anissa. Just want to make sure we focus on that second bullet. If your current rent, when we run rent reasonableness, and Anissa, I want to make sure this is clear. If your current rent is above the rent reasonableness amount that is determined when we run the assessment, we are required to adjust your rent down. So before you submit a request for rent increase, please ensure that you look at the market and make sure that your unit is not already above the market, because once we run rent reasonableness, we can't take it back. We have to reduce the contract rent if it comes back lower than the amount of your current rent. Thank you, Anissa. Sorry.
Thank you. All right. So the maximum allowable rent will be limited to the rate of inflation plus 2% and not more than 10% each year. 8.9% is the current percentage that will be granted for rent increases until April 30th, 2024, except where local law dictates otherwise, including in rent stabilized units. New contract rents will take effect the first of the month following 60 days after DCHA's receipt of owner's request and the tenant is notified. So 60 days after DCHA's receipt of the request and the tenant is notified. You can create an account on the owner's portal to request a rent increase, and a new lease is not required. And I want to make sure that you understand, if you start a new lease with your tenant, then the HAP contract that is currently in effect is terminated, and you will have to start the RFTA process all over. So a new lease is not required for a rent increase request. And all of this is effective again on July 1st. To give an example of a rent increase request and how that calculation is done, the new rent to landlord is the lesser of the maximum allowable increase, the reasonable rent, and the requested rent. So it is the lesser of those three factors. So if the tenant has been in your unit for at least 12 months and you've had an inspection that is passed and current, and your current contract rent is $2,000, and the amount that you request for a rent increase is $2,500, you would take your current contract rent and multiply it times 1.089 to give you that equals $2,178. And if the rent reasonableness tool, which is affordablehousing.com, determines that the maximum determined rent is $2,437, the new rent that you would be granted, which is the lesser of the three, would be the $2,178. And for many of you who have the question, would you know what that rent reasonableness maximum is? The answer is only if it's below or it's the lesser of the three. So we would not publish the information that is that we are seeing from the website. All right, and now it's time for questions.
Yeah, thank you, team. And again, we understand the chat function wasn't working. If you haven't seen it, Ms. Jenna has put her email out to everyone. So if you have questions, if you can send those over to her by email, we'll try to respond to each one. And any question we're not able to respond to this evening, we will respond to in writing and place on the website. Jenna.
Jenna, would you like to share your email address if they don't already know?
It's in the chat.
Okay.
And we have a ton of questions that have come through, so I will start going through those. The first two questions are similar, so I'm just going to read them both, and you can speak to the answer to both. Have the HCVP maximum allowable submarket rents been updated recently, or will they be? And will the neighborhood rents go away now? If not, will these numbers be changed as well?
The submarket rents will no longer be effective.
So we're moving away from submarket rents.
Yep.
As
So-
of July 1st. No more submarket rents.
Okay. How is rent reasonableness being assessed for tax credit properties? HUD guidelines state that rent reasonableness for tax credit properties should be based on an unassisted unit at the same property and not the SAFMR rent. Can you confirm if this is the case? And if not, why are you deviating from HUD guidelines?
We can confirm that we are following the HUD's guidelines for tax credit buildings. For all of our units, as a matter of fact, going forward to stay in compliance with HUD, we're following the regulations.
Okay. The next question is there a way we can find out the new rents prior to requesting a rent increase or a lease up so that we can make educated decisions as to whether or not to request a rent increase or approve a tenant to move in? And then there's just a recognition that the rent estimator on affordablehousing.com produces different results than what's on Zillow.
Yes, the rent estimator is, it's a good indicator, but we would suggest, as you would do on the open market, use all available sources to determine the value of your unit. And once you do that, then submit a request for a rent increase or set the rent on a request for tenancy approval. To directly answer your question, no, we will not be notifying you in advance of what your unit is valued at. The Housing Choice Voucher Program was set to mirror the open market. And as an owner manager, you are better suited to determine the value of your unit than we are. So once you make that determination, then it's upon you to submit that either rent increase or lease or request for tenancy approval for that tenant. So in short, no, we're not going to provide anything in advance. We're going to depend on our partners, the owners and property managers, to do a market analysis prior to them submitting a rent increase and or completing a request for tenancy approval.
Okay. If the tenant is on a biennial inspections every 24 months, would the rent increase still meet the requirement of having an inspection within the 12 months? Or would another inspection be required just for the rent increase?
No inspection would be required for the rent increase, and it's a 24-month cycle.
Okay. According to the process map, the inspection comes after the rent reasonableness review. I have been notified that an inspection is scheduled for the 30th. Will this be canceled?
No, that would not be canceled. So the affordability and rent reasonableness has always been done before inspection. So we've always reviewed the packet for owners' information, for tenants' information, done the 40% test, and review what we have now, the submarkets, to see if your asking rent is within the submarket. That process is still the same. The only thing that's changed is our system. So instead of submarkets, we have affordable.com that will be running your information through. Instead of utility calculator, we have utility allowance schedule. There is no change. The process, the leasing process is the same. We will be doing everything before scheduling an inspection.
And this process, again, does not start until July 1.
Okay, so the next question is about rent increases. Someone says they haven't had a rent increase in 3 to 4 years. Will they be allowed a free rent increase to catch up for the low rent and for the lost rent and high inflation? Otherwise, the unit rent will be permanently behind the market rate going forward.
The rent increase that's approved, the amount is 8.9%. So it would not be giving a period for each year that you haven't had a rent increase. It's approved at 8.9% right now.
If rent reasonableness supports it, that's the maximum that we can provide at this point.
Correct.
And I just want to add that that's also if local law permits it. So there's some changes to the local law that we're reviewing now that could change what that looks like.
Yes.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, the next question is a bit of a comment. It would be great to a great help if we are provided with a range for rent. Without a range, how would we request rent increases or even think about offering our unit to housing? I think we've talked a little bit about that already, so I'm gonna skip over that one. Will the rent still be dependent on location? Meaning, for example, an identical unit in Trinidad would go for the same amount as a unit in Georgetown.
Location is a factor in the rent reasonableness assessment. So it depends on what units are going for, like and similar units are going for in that area where the unit is located.
Yes, and they use the closest possible comps, not comps that are
Neighborhoods. They're doing, so like a 0.5 radius. They're not doing neighborhood to neighborhood. So the whole neighborhood concept is going away.
Okay, the next question is, should housing case managers use the site's free version when working with folks to locate apartments?
Should they? It's a tool that we recommend you utilize, but not only that tool.
Okay. What is the rationale behind the change? And what is the why behind rent reasonableness? What was wrong with the old way?
It wasn't in compliance with HUD rules for the program. Simply put, the housing authority was not in compliance, and we had to come in compliance with doing rent reasonableness in accordance with the HUD requirements.
How do we look at the market to determine rent reasonableness?
How do we look at the market? I guess goes back to our previous answer that we use all the available resources that are out there, public resources, and look at your neighbors, look at what you're charging for unassisted units to determine what the value of your unit is prior to either requesting a rent increase or receiving and completing a request for tenancy approval. So the same market analysis you would do for a private tenant is what you would do for a housing choice voucher tenant.
Will new payment standards for each neighborhood be issued on July 1st? And Anissa, would you mind taking down the presentation? Then people can see it.
Okay.
So no, again, we are no longer doing neighborhoods. So we got to get the concept of neighborhoods and submarkets away. The rent reasonable concept that we're using is a unit to unit analysis. So there will not be no update to submarkets on July 1st.
Okay. Is rent
just so we know that I think we answered the question, but part of the question was payment standards, I believe, right? So there is one set of payment standards which are currently set at 187% of the fair market rent. That is the payment standards district-wide.
Okay, the next question is rent reasonableness only done if an increase is requested? For example, I'm a new landlord. At the time I renew the lease, is this exercise done at that time or only triggered by an increased request?
If you submit a new RFTA package or if you request a rent increase, rent reasonableness is done.
Right.
Again, if you start a new lease, though, if you have your tenant to sign a new lease, which is not required, then your HAP contract terminates and you would have to start the RFTA process again.
Will DCHA cover water bills for tenants that are sub-metered by sub-metering services?
No. Housing Authority does not cover any utilities.
If you do not agree with the new rent, what is the process to terminate renting to Section 8 tenants?
You would follow local law.
You would follow your law, local law in your lease.
What is 187% of FMR? Can you explain with an example?
Sure, let's do the math here. For instance, if the fair market rent for a one-bedroom unit was $100, we would set the payment standard at 187% of that. So that would be 100 times 187%. 7%, which gets us, what does that get us? Quick math. I'll shoot my calculator here. Anybody faster at doing this math than I am?
I just wanted to add that the fair markets are published by area on HUD's website, and then you would multiply that times the 187.
Right.
187, Dorian.
Yeah, duh, that's simple math. 187. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So,
the next question is, what motivates landlords to accept tenants with vouchers when the rent is the same as the market rate? Considering the risks associated with renting to voucher holders, such as potential lease violations.
well, you guys mind if I take that? I believe that lease violations, there's a potential for assisted tenants and unassisted tenants. I believe the benefit of working with the Housing Choice Voucher program are few. One of which is our tenants have something to lose. A voucher subsidy is valued at between $750,000 to $1 million throughout the lifetime of a resident. And violating their lease could cause them to be terminated and lose a lifetime benefit. In addition, a benefit is that every first of the month or close to it, you will receive 60 to 70% of your rent, if not more, guaranteed. That is a guarantee. Housing Authority does not miss payments. A third benefit that I think is a benefit that some owners may disagree is that we do inspect your unit. We have some owners who are small mom and pops or don't have the ability to go out and inspect their units regularly. We do. We will go out and inspect your unit and tell you what the condition of your unit is, so you can ensure that you're maintaining your property and not having a large amount of deferred maintenance that could cost you a lot more money in the long run. So I think the inspections is a plus, guaranteed rent money on the first, and that our families do have something to lose. They have something to lose that's very valuable in the market.
I would add, Dorian, that those landlords that just went through the last 3 years with us got the benefit of being paid, where some tenants did not have, market tenants did not have money to pay their landlords, and there were local laws in place that allowed them to not pay their landlords, but our participating landlords got paid.
And I do want to say this, the agency is looking at some other ideas that can help us incentivize our owner partners to participate in the program. And we're open to any and all ideas that you may have. So please, if you have ideas of some incentives that we can provide that makes this program more valuable to you, or more likely to utilize the program, please send those over for consideration. We can't guarantee that we will use them, but we're always looking for ways to better market our program so we can successfully utilize, or not successfully, utilize the vouchers we have to assist the families that are in need in the area.
Okay, the next question is, again, whether we can do the rent reasonableness assessment before someone decides to submit an RFTA. And the answer to that question is no. The next question is, what does it mean when Anissa said that a HAP is terminated when a new lease is put into place? Long-term tenants constantly ask for a new lease for the kid's school or the utility company or DMV or a future rental company.
So according to HUD rules, when a new lease is signed, the HAP contract follows that lease. So if it's terminated, that HAP contract is terminated. So you would have to do the RFTA process again to start a new lease. So a new lease is not required for our processing.
If I could add, just as a recommendation for those schools that are requesting new lease, I would recommend doing some type of addendum, some type of verification that a client is in a lease instead of providing an entire new lease. So you won't be in jeopardy of having your HAP contract terminated.
And I just want to kind of add on to that as well. Having that contract terminated doesn't mean you lose out on funds. It just means that we have to start the HAP contract process over again. That when you first initiated a lease with this tenant and you went through the HAP contracting process, we have to do that all over again. That's why Anissa was saying that we have to start the process over. You wouldn't lose anything, but it could delay some of your payments. So we don't recommend it. It's not required. However, we do understand some owners and property managers want their tenants in a lease agreement, which we totally understand. Just know that when you submit the new lease agreement, we do have to, by regulations, do a new HAP contract.
And also, I just want to make sure that we do state, when you are signing a new lease, the client do have to request a voucher briefing. So we will stop the payments, hold the payments, and they will not be retro paid. They will start when the new contract starts.
Hopefully will be the next day.
Again, a new lease is not required. I would like to say that again, so that we're not in the predicament. We're trying to be as transparent as possible, so you're not in a predicament where you're missing months of payments and trying to charge it to the tenant. So just make sure. I highly recommend doing verification letters for schools or daycares or anything of that sort instead of developing a whole new contract.
Just a follow-up question to that one. If a landlord is not raising rent for a 5-year tenant and not giving a new lease, is the new lease package required?
Nope. All clear. Just continue. All clear.
Okay. The next question is if rent is reduced because of a rent increase request, will DCHA provide proof of why?
When you say proof of why, if you're saying that proof of the market analysis showing that the current rent is not reasonable, yes, we can provide that.
For those of us who are existing landlords, and only the voucher holder took advantage of the utility allowance. For example, I pay only water and the tenant pays electricity. Can my utility payment be factored into the rent increase?
If I understand the question correctly, I'm going to say no, because when the utility allowance is used to determine basically the amount of subsidy we're going to pay on behalf of the tenant, it's part of the calculations. So short answer, no.
Okay. The next question is, does DCHA offer other training information sessions for landlords? This is really helpful.
Yes,
We are
so
going to have-
we
go ahead.
definitely do. We definitely do. And one great thing is we have Noelle, who's actually online right now. She is the lead for all landlord orientations. And we are also going to be providing landlord orientations on a regular basis. So there will be a schedule. And if at any time currently you can email Ms. Wishart for a landlord orientation. We are also when leasing packets are being submitted and we have new owners, we are recommending that they attend the orientation briefing so they can get a whole overview of DCHA rules and policies as it relate in conjunction with HUD regulations.
And we'll also look to see if we can put a schedule of owner orientation, owner information sessions on the website, so you can see what's coming up and schedule accordingly so you can attend one of these sessions. Because things are changing all the time. We get new HUD regulations, new HUD guidelines, and they are very helpful for our owners to keep them abreast of what's going on in the program.
And just also to add, we're also going to be adding this to the owner's portal. So the email, the blasts that we will be doing on the portal will continue. So we highly recommend everyone register as an owner with DCHA. Even if you haven't located you a participant yet, go ahead and register so you'll be able to get those updates.
Can you speak to the appeals process? Can someone appeal if there's a disagreement about features of a unit? Can you appeal if you apply for a rent increase and DCHA comes back and says this isn't reasonable?
Yes, there will be. And Nissa, please jump in. If your rent increase is denied or if we're having to reduce your contract rent, there's going to be a letter sent to you explaining why that determination was made. At the bottom of the letter, it's going to say if you disagree, you can submit your supporting documents to an email address for an appeal. Is that correct, Anissa?
That is correct.
Did I miss anything?
No, that is correct.
Just that you should make sure that when you're filling out those amenities and features, or if you're filling out an RFTA for an original submission or an initial submission, that you are filling in that information to the best of your ability. If it's an initial submission, the inspector will be verifying that information. Also, we encourage you to go and register your units on the affordablehousing.com app so that they will have that information available to do the specific comparables to your unit. So the more information they have, the better.
Okay. Next question.
Can I just piggyback on that? We're also going to be advising our families that affordablehousing.com has listings. So you can market your units there. So any units that you have are going to have available, you put them on affordablehousing.com. We're going to be advising our applicants and our current tenants. If you're looking for a unit, go to affordablehousing.com. There will be listings there. So we encourage you to list your properties on affordablehousing.com.
Okay, that's a great segue to our next question, which is about the difference between affordablehousing.com and the tool created by affordablehousing.com that DCHA is using. Can you speak to the difference? The public-facing website versus what we're using.
I'm going to say no, we cannot. I don't want to say something that's incorrect. The affordablehousing.com team will be available tomorrow, but we can take that question and we'll punt it over to them and have them write a detailed response, and we'll put it in the FAQs and in the response to everyone. I don't want to say something that may not be 100% accurate.
Okay. The old process was that for any correct lease up package submitted by the 5th of the month, the move-in could be by the 1st of the month. Has this changed?
That has not changed. The leasing process has not changed. So any package submitted by the 5th of the month, the client will be able to move the 1st of the next month. And a packet after the 5th, the client will be approved to move the following month.
Once the rent increase goes into effect, when is the next allowable rent increase allowed after that? And is the tenant still considered a month-to-month tenant?
Second part of your question, yes, they're still month to month, unless you have them sign a new lease for 12 months, 24 months, or whatnot. And I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
I think the first part of the question is asking how often you can ask for a rent increase.
After the initial 12 months, your lease dictates and the market dictates when you can ask for another rent increase. But because the market doesn't change that often, we like to say every 12 months.
As a landlord partnering with DCHA for the last 6 years, I've never received an increase. Given the subjective nature of determining the correct rent price, which specific steps would you recommend for me to calculate the price that will best match DCHA's rent?
Okay, well, I'm going to say DCHA does not have a rent. It is what the market supports. So I would recommend that you look for like and similar units in your area and find out what those units are rented for, and make sure they're not assisted to determine what the value of your unit is.
Okay. We have submitted a request for tenancy packet in June. The move-in date is in August. Will the new rent reasonableness changes affect this tenancy, or will the existing rent rate be in effect?
Any contracts effective July 1st or after the effective date of the contract, we have to follow our new rent reasonableness guidelines.
Okay. Based on your in-depth knowledge of DC housing market, how do you anticipate rents will change under this new policy?
We're hoping that it doesn't. I think some of the local laws have a bigger impact on the rents than this process, because we're going to approve rents that are reasonable and that are equal to what's being paid on the open market. So if the open market supports, and I'm using a hypothetical here, $2,500 for a 2-bedroom unit in your area, that's what we will approve. So we're hoping that there is no impact from our process. There may be impacts from other things that happen within the district, but our process should not impact the rents in the marketplace.
Will the condo fee be considered in the utility allowance if it includes water?
Water will be considered, but not the condo fee. And plus, just note, our utility schedule is based on a market of by bedroom size and what the average is for that bedroom size for that utility type. So it's not gonna consider the actual water bill or the actual condo fee that includes the water bill.
Okay. Will the square footage of the unit be considered when running comparables?
Yes.
They do look at square footage, yes.
The affordablehousing.com website shows estimated rent at county, city, zip, and 0.61 mile radius. Which one are we using?
We're going to go with a 1/4 mile radius. And if there are no comps available for your type of unit, we will expand that radius. But initially, we're looking to be in about a 1/4 mile radius when we're running rent reasonableness to find units that are comparable to yours.
For a rent increase, when and how does the tenant get notified? When the request is made, or only when it is approved? Under what scenarios would it cause a tenant's portion to change because of the rent increase?
Well, one thing to note, when you're submitting us a rent increase, you should be notifying your tenant that you're submitting a rent increase. So they should hear it first from you that you are submitting a rent increase to the housing authority. When we process the rent increase, as noted, it would be effective 60 days from the date that is of the request, and that will be given in, with a rent determination notice outlining what the tenant portion is and what the landlord portion, what the tenant portion is and what our portion would be.
And we are required, if the rent goes up, to give our tenants at least 30 days notice before the change. And understand that when you submit a rent increase, most of the time, a percentage of that increase will impact the tenant's portion of rent. The housing authority will not be paying the entire amount of the increase. So we want to make sure that you understand that if, and I'm using a scenario, if you raise the rent $200, a good portion of that will be paid by the tenant.
And the tenant has the option on your month-to-month lease to decide that they do not want to continue the lease and ask for a voucher and relocate. They will have to abide by the lease terms in terms of relocating with the notice given, but we do require a 30-day notice. So if the tenant feel like it's no longer affordable to them, they can decide to move in, or let me say this, they can also go communicate with their landlord, which is what we like to have healthy relationships, to let them know, hey, I cannot afford this. I know you asked for the rent increase, but of the $200, I picked up $150. Are we able to reduce it by $50 or $100? If so, the tenant portion can be reduced by that amount.
Okay, there's a question about utilities. It says, Dorian said that DCHA does not pay utilities. Why did he say that? What if it is landlord pays all utilities? Won't the contract rent be increased by the utility allowance?
By the utility allowance? No. That question I was answering previously was similar. It was something to the effect of the housing authority pay for utilities, and we do not. The utility allowance is a schedule of deductions that we provide either to the tenant for utilities that they pay. If the owner is paying all the utilities, that would be a factor in considering what the contract rent is for that unit. So I'm not going to say blanketly that it would increase the contract rent, but it would impact rent reasonableness because you are paying for all the utilities.
Thank you. Will the rent rate be automatically adjusted if a HAP contract is reissued? For example, if persons are removed from the HAP. I'm not sure I understand that question.
I think they're asking if they're doing changes to lease and people are being removed. If the voucher is the let me say this. If you're in a contract and I currently have a 3-bedroom voucher and I remove amount of people from my household and I go to a 1-bedroom voucher, my voucher will be decreased to a 1-bedroom voucher, and it could affect, it would not change the contract rent. It will affect the tenant's portion.
Okay. If tenants do not sign a new lease when their 12-month lease ends, can they give notice at any time, or are they locked in for another 12 months?
It actually depends on what your lease says. So there are some leases that renew month to month, and there are some leases that renew year to year. So it depends on what you have in your actual lease.
Great. What notice period do you require to ensure approval before a lease expires to confirm payment is not interrupted? And I think this is if someone is submitting a new lease for an existing tenant whose 12-month period just came to an end.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So I think if I understand, it was in response to Dorian, what you said. So they would still have to submit that RTA package between the 1st and the 5th of the month. Inspection, and then we would start the new contract.
But I want to make sure I add, Anissa, that the client has to be issued a voucher.
Yes.
But you cannot submit an RTA packet without a voucher. So if we're in June and your 1 year is up October and you're having the tenant sign a new lease right now, that tenant should be asking for a voucher, to be issued a voucher, for you to get an RTA, for you to submit a lease that has that, a transfer briefing to be issued that voucher. You complete a RFTA, and we review it from there. But note, if you just are doing it for a rent increase, you do not need a new lease. All you need to do is go to your portal, hit finance, and go to request a rent increase.
Is tomorrow's session virtual or in person?
In person. We're live.
Is in person.
Yes,
We're in
looking
living
forward
color.
to it. Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Okay, great. The next question is, since the process is now like an appraisal, what are the data sources that affordablehousing.com uses? Are all the data sources readily available to the public?
Yes, and we talked about this on the slide earlier, and I believe the slide deck will be made available to you. Those are some of the sources that are utilized by affordablehousing.com, but I know they use others, including rent rolls submitted by owners and property managers.
If a tenant with a 1-bedroom voucher wants to rent a 2-bedroom apartment, will the voucher pay the reasonable rent for the 2-bedroom apartment?
Well, first, that because we're doing a unit-to-unit analysis, that would be yes. So if I have a 1-bedroom voucher, and you are marketing a 2-bedroom for the price of a 1, yes, the client can have it. However, I do want to note that this applies to federal and local programs. If that client has a local DHS voucher, they do not allow the clients to go up bedroom size. They have to get the size of the actual voucher. So you would need to know that. But for us, on the federal side, if you have a 1, you can get a 2, as long as it's within the range of the 1.
It's as long as it's affordable to the tenant. As long as it's
Exactly.
affordable to the tenant, so they can shop up for 2, 3, 4-bedroom, whatever it is. And if whatever the rent is, if it's reasonable, determined reasonable, we can pay that as long as it's affordable to the tenant. But this only applies to the Housing Choice Voucher Program, not the local programs.
Exactly.
Okay. For an existing landlord and existing lease that does not include utilities, does DCHA allow the landlord and tenant to request this to change via a lease addendum to include utilities and a DCHA utility allowance moving forward? If so, how should we make this request?
We actually do not take a lease addendum. You will have to do the process, or the client will have to request the voucher, go to a voucher briefing. You will have to submit an RFTA. If utilities are changing in a lease, we have to have a new HAP contract. So you have to start your RAFTA process over in order to change the utilities.
However, yes. So and to answer your question, yes. If you're changing utility responsibilities, yes, you can do that. It just requires us to do a new HAP contract.
With renewals, I thought that existing vouchers would be grandfathered into their current rent if the rent reasonableness study found the rent to be higher than the new standards. Is that not correct?
Well, we are grandfathering the current contract rents in as long as you do not request a rent increase. So we are not arbitrarily reducing any contract rents at this time. So if hypothetically your current rent is above the market, we're not doing anything. So those are going to stay at the current level. However, if you submit a request for rent increase and we are required to run rent reasonableness at that time, then we would have to reduce your contract rent. But as of right now, if your current rent is above the market, we will not be reducing your rent unless you submit a request for rent increase.
When you said you were referencing the affordablehousing.com website, are you talking specifically about their market rent estimator? Does this site allow for owners to directly input features, location, size, type, and other amenities that we can use for assessment purposes?
Our understanding from our yesterday's meeting is yes, you can add your unit and all the specifics of your unit into affordablehousing.com. Again, unfortunately, they weren't able to join us, but I believe a similar question came up yesterday, and the answer was yes, you can load your information directly into affordablehousing.com.
Okay. Since unit size will be a factor in rent reasonableness, are there unit size standard ranges by the number of bedrooms that will be used? If so, are there those standard ranges available to the public?
If I understand the question, no.
There's no standard range.
No standard ranges.
Okay. Will there be a change in how a unit is assessed, meaning the bedroom, living room, et cetera, et cetera?
There would be no changes.
Anissa, you want to, I know this is one of your
No,
pain
there's
points.
no
Anissa.
change to HQS. Housing quality standards are used, so there are no changes.
What is the expected timeline for this process from a landlord's request to a final response from DCHA? And it doesn't specify this, but I'm assuming that it's a request for an increase.
So a request for an increase, again, the 60-day timeline would be effective. So if you requested on July 1 and you meet all of the factors, then you would be given an answer September.
July 1, if you submit it on July 1, it will be effective September 1st. We will notify the tenant by
August 1st.
August 1st, because we
August
have to get
1st.
30 days notice, and you will get a copy of that notice. So both the tenant and the owner will get 30 days notice prior to the effective date of the increase.
How do we as landlords report these violations to DCHA when violations persist but do not warrant a hearing in landlord-tenant court?
We have a mediation team. So if you're having any issues or you need some type of mediation between you and the tenant on repeated lease violations that you're saying you can't file something through the court, you can contact our mediation team.
Okay. We have a tenant moving in July 1st. Our inspection was done last week. Will the new standard apply?
Nope. So this new standard applies to all RFTAs submitted on the 1st of July and forward. Anything that's already been submitted with effective dates for July 1st or August 1st, they would not be changing. The process has already started and have already been under the old system. As of July 1st, any packet that's submitted and forward will be up under the new utility allowance schedule and rent reasonableness with affordablehousing.com.
The residents will therefore now pay more than 30% of their income for rent. Is there a cap on rent burden they can assume? And I know Akeisha is excited to answer this question. She loves to talk about rent burden.
So the client cannot pay no more than 40%. This has always been the case. The client is either paying between 30 and 40% of their income on initial lease ups. They cannot pay no more than 40%. So I guess the answer to that was yes, the client can pay no more than 40%.
Okay. If HUD has FMR values by zip code, why do we need to use tools like affordablehousing.com?
One, the regulations require it. The regulations require us to run reasonableness for every unit in which we put under contract. That is non-negotiable from a HUD's perspective, and they've made that clear to us, and as it is with every housing authority, that they must run reasonableness when they're entering into a HAP contract for a tenant, with an owner for one of our subsidized tenants. The fair market rents are a guide for housing authorities to set their payment standards, which is the maximum subsidy we'll pay on behalf of the tenant. It's not the contract rent. It is used to set payment standards. And there's a lot behind that, and that I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But I do want to say the payment standards are not the maximum rent that can be charged. They are not. It is a tool that HUD provides us that we use to determine the amount of subsidy that we pay on behalf of our families.
Okay, if I had an $1,000 for rent amount, does adding 187% to it make it automatically acceptable? Can you explain this in a little more detail? No. We can explain it in a little more detail, but the answer is no, and I'll let the team answer it.
Anissa, you want to go back because you gave that example?
Sure. So the contract rent is what you would start with if you have an existing client or participant in your unit. And the maximum amount that's allowable right now, unless laws change, is the 8.9%. So you would multiply your current contract rent times 1.089% to get the maximum allowable increase, as long as that amount is the lesser of the amount that you requested, and the amount determined by affordablehousing.com. I hope that answered your question. So you should not confuse the payment standard with the maximum allowable rent increase percentage. Two different things.
And we're starting to lose people from the meeting. I think people probably recognize, or people have other things to do this evening. There are 5 more questions that I have submitted already, so I am going to get through those, and then we will end. But you are more than welcome to continue to send questions, and we'll update our FAQ after. So the next question is: tenants currently paying utilities and landlord not increasing rent. Can the tenant continue to pay utilities?
Yes.
Okay. We prefer a new lease because when our leases expire, the lease automatically goes month to month. It sounds as if we must submit a new RFTA to increase rent and have a 12-month lease. Without lease agreements, there is instability in lease expirations.
Is that a statement or a question?
That's a statement.
It's a statement. Yeah, it's a statement. Okay.
But I think they're asking for clarification. If they want a 12-month lease, do they need to submit a new RFTA to DCHA? And the answer to that question
The answer is yes, unless they're writing something in their lease where they're saying their lease renews year to year to keep the 12-month term.
The last question we have is there a resource list available to housing providers? And the example that gave is they're trying to access the mediation team.
Yes, we can provide that information to you. You can email any of us and we can provide that information to you.
And going forward, we will ensure this type of information is on the website and
Exactly.
easy to navigate so you can find the resource that you need.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We really appreciate all of the thoughtful questions, and we are looking forward to continuing to partner with you to make sure that this rollout is successful. I put my email address in the chat, so if you have additional questions, please do not hesitate to send them to me. And I hope that you have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.